bolt slid shut with the same sound it had made for 7 years. Maeve Tindarel pressed her palm flat against the attic window, where the afternoon sun cut through the dust in long golden blades, warm on the glass, never on her skin. Below her, the gardens of Harrowmere blazed green and bright, gravel paths raked clean, hedges trimmed into perfect walls. A world built for people who were allowed outside. She had been 12 when the Earl first turned that bolt. She was 19 now, footsteps on the stairs, deliberate. The way a man climbs when he is in no hurry, because he knows the thing waiting for him at the top cannot run. The door opened. The Earl of Harrowmere, Lord Ferrens Calloway, ducked beneath the low frame, his riding gloves still on, the smell of horse and cold air clinging to him. "You've been at the window again," he said. "Not a question." Maeve lowered her hand. "I like the light." "The light," he repeated, almost amused. Then the back of his glove caught her across the cheek, and the bright room tilted, and she was on the floorboards with a taste of copper in her mouth, and the dust rising around her like something disturbed from sleep. He crouched down to her level, calm, patient, as though he had all the time in the world, because for 7 years he had. "No one is coming for you," he said softly. "No one even knows you're alive." He was wrong, because at that very moment, 3 riders in the black and gold of the royal household were already turning off the main road, and the lead rider was holding a portrait of a girl with Maeve's exact face, a girl the Crown had been searching for since the night she vanished. Why is the king's household hunting for a girl the world believes is dead? What does the Earl know? And what did he steal the night he locked that door? And when those riders reach Harrowmere, will they free her? Or has the Earl already decided that no one leaves his house alive? The truth about Maeve Tindarel is bigger than anyone in that house can survive. If your heart is already pounding, do me a favor, drop a comment, smash that subscribe button and stay with me. Part 2 is coming, and the moment those riders dismount, everything this Earl built is going to burn. Subscribe now. You do not want to miss what she's been hiding all these years. Before the attic, before the bolt, before the 7 years that hollowed her out, Maeve Tindarel had been a girl who believed the world was kind. She had grown up in the village of Weslow, in a cottage that smelled of bread and wood smoke, the kind of place where the floorboards knew your footsteps, and the kettle was always near boiling. Her mother, Oriani, took in mending and sang while she worked, her voice low and even, threading through the small rooms like warmth itself. Maeve would sit at her feet, sorting buttons by colour, and think that nothing in the world could ever go wrong so long as that voice kept singing. They were not wealthy. Maeve's dresses were let out at the seams and handed down until the fabric went soft as paper. But she had never once gone to bed hungry, and her mother had a way of making small things feel like treasures. A ribbon found in the road, a windfall apple, the first frost spider webbing across the window glass. Oriane taught her to notice the world, to hold it gently, to be grateful for the light. The light, even then it had mattered to her. What Maeve did not know, what no one in Weslow knew, was that her mother flinched whenever a fine carriage rolled through the village, that Oriane kept a small wooden box buried beneath the hearthstone and checked it on nights when she thought Maeve was sleeping, that she had given her daughter a name that did not match the one written in the parish records, and had a reason for it she never spoke aloud. Maeve only knew that her mother loved her fiercely, and that sometimes, for no reason she could name, that love had the sharp edge of fear in it. The first strange thing happened when Maeve was 11. A man came to the cottage one grey afternoon, dressed too well for Weslow, his boots untouched by the mud, everyone else tracked everywhere. He did not come inside. He stood at the gate and spoke to her mother in a low voice. and Maeve watched from the window as Oriani's face went pale and still. When the man left, her mother bolted the door, something she had never done in daylight, and held Maeve so tightly that the girl could feel her heart slamming against her ribs. "Who was that?" Maeve had asked. "No one," her mother said. "No one at all." But she packed a bag that night. Maeve heard her moving in the dark. The soft clink of the wooden box, the rustle of clothing folded too quickly. In the morning the bag was gone, hidden somewhere, and her mother smiled as though nothing had happened and sliced bread for breakfast, with hands that trembled only slightly. Maeve told herself she had dreamed it. Children are good at telling themselves things. There was a woman in the village named Bess Harrogate, the midwife, broad and kind, with hands that had brought half of Westlow into the world. Bess loved Maeve like her own, slipping her honey cakes and calling her little sparrow for the way she perched in windows and on fences, always watching, always wanting to see more of the world than the village could show her. It was Bess who once said, half laughing, that Maeve had the bones of a fine lady, that she'd been born in the wrong cottage. Oriane had snapped at her so sharply that Bess fell silent and never said it again. Maeve remembered that too, the way her mother's voice had cracked like a whip over something that seemed to a child like a harmless joke. The seasons turned. Maeve grew tall and quick-witted, with a stubborn streak that made her question everything, and a tenderness that made her cry over wounded birds. She dreamed of seeing the cities she'd heard about, the great houses with their 100 windows, the sea she had never laid eyes on. She did not understand yet that some dreams are dangerous to speak aloud, that some girls are safer when no one looks at them too closely. Then her mother fell ill. It came on fast, a fever that would not break, and Bess sat with them through the long nights, pressing cool cloths to Oriane's brow. In her final hours, lucid for the first time in days, Oriane gripped her daughter's wrist with startling strength and pulled her close. Her eyes were bright and terrified. "Listen to me," she whispered. "If anyone ever comes for you, anyone who knows your true name, you run. Do you hear me? You do not trust them. Not the kind ones, especially not the kind ones." "Mama, what name? I don't understand." But the fever pulled her back under, and Oriane never surfaced again. She died just before dawn, with the first grey light touching the window, and Maeve held her hand until it went cold and thought her heart would simply stop from the weight of being so alone. She was 12 years old. The funeral was small. Bess wept openly. The village was kind in the way villages are, with covered dishes and murmured condolences, and then they went back to their lives, because that is what the living do. Maeve stayed in the cottage that no longer smelled of bread, only of absence, and waited for someone to tell her what came next. Someone did. He came 3 weeks after the burial, and he came in daylight, in a carriage so fine the whole village turned out to stare. A tall man with silver at his temples and a voice like cool water, who climbed down with unhurried grace and looked at Maeve standing in the doorway of her dead mother's house as though he had found something he had been searching for a very long time. He said his name was the Earl of Harrowmere. He said he was a distant relation, that her mother had been known to his family once, that he had only just learned of the child left behind and could not in good conscience leave her to fend for herself. He spoke gently, he smiled. He crouched down to meet her eyes, the way kind men do with frightened children, especially not the kind ones. Her mother's voice rose up in her, sudden and sharp, but Maeve was 12 and orphaned, and so very tired of being afraid alone. Bess hovered at her shoulder, uncertain, while the Earl produced papers and spoke of guardianship and a fine house and an education befitting a girl of her quality. Of her quality, Bess repeated softly, and Maeve saw something flicker across the old woman's face, something that looked almost like recognition, almost like dread. Maeve looked up at the stranger with the gentle voice and the patient smile, and against everything her mother had told her, she took his hand. She did not know it was the last time she would feel sunlight on her skin for 7 years. She did not know that the wooden box beneath the hearthstone, the box she'd left behind in her grief, held the only proof of who she truly was. She only knew the carriage was warm and the man was kind, and somewhere a bolt was already waiting to be drawn. What was inside that box? And why had the Earl come for a penniless village girl as though she were the most precious thing in England? The first year, Maeve waited to be rescued. She did not understand at 12 that the turn of a bolt could be the end of a life. The Earl had brought her to Harrowmere in that warm carriage, past the bright gardens and the 100-windowed face of the great house, and for a single hour she had believed every promise. There would be lessons. There would be silk. There would be a new family to fill the hollow her mother had left. Then a servant, with a flat, frightened face, had led her up a narrow staircase, higher and higher, past the floors where people lived, to a single room beneath the roof, bare boards, a cot, one window, and the Earl standing in the doorway with that same patient smile, watching her turn in a slow circle, watching the moment understanding broke across her face. "You'll be comfortable here," he said. "Where are the others? You said there would be lessons. There will be everything you need." He stepped back into the stairwell. "In time. When you're ready." "Ready for what?" He did not answer. The door closed. The bolt slid home with a sound she would come to know better than her own heartbeat. And Maeve stood alone in the dust and the light, and finally, far too late, understood what her mother had tried to tell her. She screamed until her voice gave out. She beat her small fists against the door until they bled. No one came. No one would come for a very long time. And the not coming was its own kind of cruelty, slower than any blow. But Maeve did not break. That was the thing the Earl had not counted on. She learned the house through its sounds. She learned which servant brought her food. A thin woman named Pell, who never met her eyes but who sometimes left an extra crust. A wrinkled apple, once a sprig of lavender that Maeve kept until it crumbled to grey dust in her palm. She learned the rhythm of the days, the church bells across the valley, the hunting parties in autumn, the long-sign silence of winter. She learned to read the light, which corner the sun reached in summer and abandoned in the cold months. She learned that the human spirit is a stubborn flame, and that even a girl locked away from the world can build an entire life inside her own head. She talked to her mother, not aloud. After the first year, when she understood talking aloud invited the Earl's attention, and his attention was a thing to be feared. But in her mind she held long conversations with Oriani, asking the questions she had never been able to ask. "Who am I? What name did you hide? Why did kindness frighten you so?" And slowly, year by year, she began to suspect the answer was tangled up with the man who held her key, because the Earl came to her, not often, but every few months he would climb the stairs and sit in the room's single chair and study her the way a collector studies an acquisition, watching her grow from child to young woman with a cold, assessing patience that chilled her more than any anger could have. He never explained. He only watched and asked small questions about what she remembered of her mother, of Weslow, of a wooden box he seemed to believe she knew about. Each time she said she knew nothing, his jaw would tighten, and once, when she was 16 and bold and tired of being a ghost, she had demanded to know why he kept her. That was the first time he struck her. She had not given him the satisfaction of tears. She had pressed her hand to her stinging cheek and looked him dead in the eye and said, "My mother told me about you. She told me not to trust the kind ones." And something flickered in his face. Fear, she realized, actual fear, before the mask came down again. "Your mother," he said quietly, "was a thief, and you are the thing she stole." He left her with that, and she turned it over in the dark for years, never understanding, only knowing it mattered more than her own life. She was 19 when everything changed. It was an ordinary afternoon, the sun cutting its golden blades through the dust, and she was at the window as she always was, watching the gardens, the gravel paths, the world she was not allowed to touch, and then she saw them. 3 riders turning off the main road, moving toward Harrowmere at a steady, purposeful pace. Black and gold colours she did not recognize, but that made something deep in the house go still. The bolt slid back. The Earl ducked through the low door, riding gloves still on, and she heard the change in him before she saw it. The patience was gone. He was rushed, afraid. "You've been at the window again," he said. "I like the light." The back of his glove caught her cheek, and the bright room tilted, and she was on the floorboards with copper in her mouth and the old dust rising around her. He crouched down, and for the first time in 7 years his calm had cracks running through it. "No one is coming for you," he said. "No one even knows you're alive." But she had seen the riders, and she understood, watching the fear move behind his eyes, that he had seen them too, and that for the first time since the day he turned that bolt, the Earl of Harrowmere was no longer the most powerful thing in her world. Below, faint through the floorboards, came the sound of horses in the courtyard, a fist hammering on the great front door, and a voice, raised and ringing with an authority that made the Earl go white, demanding entry in the name of the crown. Maeve pulled herself upright against the wall, blood on her lip, heart thundering, and thought, "They came, Mama." Someone finally came. But who were they? And when that door opened, would the truth of who she was set her free? Or had she only traded one captor for something far more dangerous? The voices below grew louder, and Maeve watched the Earl come undone. He stood over her, listening to the sounds rising through the floorboards, and she saw his mind racing behind his eyes, weighing things she could not see. Then he turned and seized her by the arm, hauling her up so fast her vision swam. "You will say nothing," he hissed. "You will not be seen. Do you understand me? Everything I have done, I did to protect you. They will tell you lies. They will dress them up as rescue. But I am the only one who has ever kept you safe." She nearly laughed. 7 years in a single room, and he called it safety. But she said nothing, because she had learned that silence was the only weapon a prisoner truly owned. And she was watching him now the way he had once watched her, studying, measuring, looking for the crack she could push her fingers into. He dragged her toward the corner, toward a low door in the slope of the roof she had never been permitted to open, fumbling with a key. A second room, a hiding place. He meant to make her disappear all over again. And something in Maeve, something that had been folded small and quiet for 7 years, finally refused. She went limp, dead weight the way a child does, sliding through his grip to the floor. And when he bent to grab her, she did the only thing she had ever been able to do in that house. She screamed. Not the broken screams of a frightened girl, but a sound torn up from the root of her, loud enough to carry through the floorboards, loud enough to reach the men below. "Up here! I'm up here!" The Earl's hand cracked across her face to silence her, but it was too late, and they both knew it. Boots were already pounding up the narrow stairs, the whole house seeming to shudder with the force of them. The Earl straightened, his composure snapping back into place like a mask, but his hands were shaking now, and Maeve saw it, and the seeing of it gave her more strength than food ever had. The door burst inward. 3 men filled the small room, and the light caught the black and gold of their coats. And the first of them, tall and broad, with a soldier's bearing and eyes that took in everything at once, looked from the Earl to the girl crumpled bleeding against the wall, and went very, very still. "My Lord Harrowmere," he said, and his voice was soft, and somehow that softness was more terrifying than a shout. "Step away from her," "This is my ward," the Earl said. "A troubled girl. She is unwell, prone to fits. You can see she has injured herself." "I see the marks of a man's hand on her face," the soldier said. He did not look away from Maeve. "I see a window with 7 years of dust ground into the sill where her fingers have worn it smooth. I have been a long time in service, my lord, and I know a cage when I am standing in one." The Earl began to speak again, smooth and reasonable, and the soldier simply raised one gloved hand and the words died. He crossed the room and crouched down before Maeve, slow and careful, the way one approaches a wounded animal that has every reason to bite. Up close, she saw he was younger than his bearing suggested, perhaps 30, with a scar through one eyebrow and a steadiness to him that she did not trust because she had been taught that steadiness in a man was the most dangerous thing of all. "My name is Captain Regency," he said quietly. "I serve the crown. I have been looking for you for a very long time, and I need you to tell me one thing. Just one. Can you do that?" Maeve said nothing. Her mother's voice was loud in her now, not the kind ones, especially not the kind ones. "What were you called?" Vale asked. "By the woman who raised you," and that she had not expected. "Not your name. Not who are you. But what were you called?" As though he already knew the name on her tongue would not be the real one. "Maeve," she whispered. "She called me Maeve." Something crossed his face. Grief, maybe, or the lifting of a long-carried weight. He closed his eyes for a single breath. "Then I have found you," he said. "Though God forgive me for how long it took." What happened next happened fast. The other 2 soldiers took the Earl, who did not go quietly, who spat that they did not understand, that he had saved her, that there were forces at work they could not comprehend, and that handing the girl to the crown would be the death of them all. Maeve listened to him rage as they bound his wrists, and for the first time in 7 years she watched the man who had owned her be made powerless, and she felt no triumph. Only a cold, hollow confusion, 'cause nothing he said sounded like the boast of a kidnapper. It sounded like a warning. They wrapped her in a cloak that smelled of horse and cold air, and Captain Vale carried her down the narrow stairs himself when her legs would not hold her. Down past the floors where people lived, through the great hall, out the front door she had been carried through as a child of 12. The sun struck her full in the face, real sun, warm on her skin for the first time in 7 years, and she made a sound she did not recognize as her own, and turned her face up into it and wept. The gardens were exactly as she had seen them from above. The gravel was real beneath her feet when Vale finally set her down. The hedges were taller than they looked from the window. She put her hand against a rose, an actual rose, and the thorn pricked her finger, and she laughed through her tears at the perfect ordinary pain of it. But the world she had dreamed of for 7 years did not feel the way she had imagined. It felt enormous and loud and dangerous, and she stood in the middle of it with no name she could trust, and no mother to guide her, and 3 armed strangers watching her every move, and she understood that she had not been rescued so much as moved. From one set of hands to another. In the days that followed, she learned slowly, painfully, to be a person in the world again. She flinched at open doors. She could not sleep without the weight of walls close around her. Food in quantity made her ill. Captain Vale was patient with all of it, never pushing, never demanding, and she hated how much she wanted to trust him, hated that her mother's warning and her own starved heart were at war inside her every waking hour. It was Vale who began gently to give her pieces of the truth. Her mother, he told her, had not been called Oriani when he first knew her. She had been a lady's maid in a great house, trusted, beloved, until the night she vanished with something that did not belong to her. Not jewels, not gold. A child, an infant girl taken from her cradle and carried out into the dark, and the woman had run so far and so cleverly that the most powerful men in the kingdom had searched for 12 years and found nothing. "The Earl found you first," Vale said. "We don't yet know how, but he found you and he locked you away, and he did not tell a living soul, which tells me he wanted you for himself and not for the men he served." "Who do I belong to?" Maeve asked, and hated the word even as she said it, because she was so tired of belonging to anyone. Vale was quiet for a long moment. "That," he said, "is the question that is going to turn this kingdom upside down. And it is the question I am under orders not to answer until we reach the capital, and you stand before the people who sent me." He looked at her then with something she could not name, something that was not quite pity and not quite awe. "I will tell you only this. The woman who raised you did not steal you out of greed. She stole you to keep you alive. There were people who wanted that infant dead, and judging by tonight, judging by the Earl, some of them want it still." The blood drained from Maeve's face. 7 years she had dreamed of freedom, and now freedom had arrived wearing the colours of the crown, and it had brought with it a truth heavier than any locked door. Someone had wanted her dead as a baby. The Earl had whispered that handing her over would be the death of them all, and now she was being carried toward the very heart of the kingdom, toward the people who had set the search in motion, with no way of knowing whether they meant to crown her or bury her. She looked at Captain Rydian Vale, at his steady eyes, and his scarred brow and his careful kindness, and she made herself a promise as in the dark of her own heart. She would learn everything. She would trust no one fully, not even him. She would never again be a girl who walked willingly into a stranger's carriage because she was tired and afraid. But the question would not let her sleep that night, or any night on the long road that followed. If her mother had died to keep her hidden, and the Earl had imprisoned her to keep her close, then who was Maeve truly? That grown men would build their whole lives around the keeping or the killing of her, and when she finally stood before the crown and learned her real name at last, would it be a gift or a sentence? They reached the capital at dusk, and Maeve was brought not to a prison and not to a palace, but to a quiet stone hall where a small council of grey-haired men and one woman waited behind a long table, their faces lit by candlelight. She stood before them in a borrowed gown, her hands clasped to hide their shaking, and Captain Vale stood at her shoulder, and she understood that whatever happened in this room would decide the whole of the rest of her life. The woman spoke first. She was old, with sharp eyes and a face like carved ivory, and she looked at Maeve for a long time before she said, "Turn toward the light, child." Maeve obeyed. The candle flame caught her face, and the old woman drew a slow breath. "It is her," she whispered. "I would know that face anywhere. She has the look of her mother, her true mother." And then they brought in the Earl. He was led between two guards, his fine coat stripped from him, his hands bound, but his eyes were as calm and cold as ever, and when they fell on Maeve a thin smile crossed his mouth. The sight of him turned her stomach to ice, but she did not look away. She had promised herself she would never look away from him again. "You have made a grave mistake," the Earl said to the council, "bringing her here. You think you are restoring something stolen. You are signing her death warrant and your own." "Explain yourself," the old woman said. So he did, and it was worse than anything Maeve had imagined. She was, he told them, the daughter of the late prince, born in secret to a marriage the court had ruled unlawful, a child whose very existence threatened the man who now sat upon the throne. Her mother, the lady's maid, had not stolen her out of malice, but out of love, smuggling the infant away the night the order came to have her quietly disposed of. For 12 years the woman had hidden her, and when she died, the Earl had found the child first, not to save her, he admitted now without shame, but to use her, a living claim to the throne that he intended to wield when the time was right. "I locked her away to keep my prize safe," he said, looking at Maeve with that cold smile. You may call it cruelty. I call it the only reason you are alive to stand here. The moment the king learns you breathe, he will send men far less gentle than the good captain to make certain you stop. The room went silent. Maeve felt the floor tilt beneath her, felt 7 years of not knowing collapse into a single unbearable truth. She was no village girl. She was the rightful heir to a kingdom, and that crown was a target painted across her heart. The old woman turned to her. "Child," she said gently, "you understand what this means. There are those who will use you as this man tried to use you, and there is the king who will want you gone. You stand at the center of a war that will tear this country apart, and you did not ask for any of it." "No," Maeve said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I did not ask for it. I asked for sunlight. I asked for my mother to live. I asked to be no one at all." She looked at the Earl, then at the council, then at Captain Vale, whose steady eyes had not left her once, and she understood that here, at last, was a choice no bolt could take from her. She could deny it. She could let them believe the Earl lied, could vanish into some quiet village under a borrowed name, could have the small, ordinary life her mother had died trying to give her. Safe, forgotten, free. Or she could claim what was hers, and in doing so paint the target so bright that no shadow could ever again pretend she did not exist. She would lose the dream of being no one. She would lose the safety of the dark. She would step into the open, where the king's men could see her, and she would never again know a moment without watching the door. Her mother had given up everything, her name, her home, her life, to keep that infant breathing in the dark. Maeve would not waste it hiding. She lifted her chin and looked at the old woman and spoke the words that ended one life and began another. "My mother called me Maeve," she said. "But you may tell the king his lost niece is alive and she is not afraid of him." The Earl's smile finally died. The council stirred, and Captain Vale, at her shoulder, breathed out a sound that was half wonder and half dread, because they all knew what she had just done. She had declared herself. And somewhere in the great palace across the city, a king who had ordered a baby's death 20 years ago was about to learn that the child had grown into a woman who would not run. But could a girl raised in an attic truly survive a court built on poison and knives? And the steady captain who had found her, whose loyalty belonged to the crown that wanted her dead, when the king finally gave the order, would Radian Vale raise his sword to protect her, or to obey? The king did not send assassins. That was the first thing that surprised everyone, including Maeve. In the days after she stood before the council and named herself, the capital seemed to hold its breath, and she waited in a guarded chamber for the order she was certain would come. The quiet visit in the dark, the cup of wine that did not taste quite right. She slept with the candle burning and her back to the wall. 7 years of the attic had taught her that the most dangerous thing in the world was a man who smiled while he meant you harm, and she expected the king to smile. Instead, he sent for her. She walked into the throne room on legs that wanted to fail her, and she found not a monster but a tired old man with shaking hands and grief carved deep into his face. He had ordered a baby's death 20 years ago, yes. He had spent the years since haunted by it, and when he saw Maeve, when he saw his late brother's eyes looking back at him from a face he had tried to erase from the world, something in him broke that had been breaking for 2 decades. He did not embrace her. He had no right, and they both knew it. But he came down from his throne, an old king kneeling before a girl raised in an attic, and he said the words that changed everything. "I cannot give you back what I took. I cannot return your mother, or your childhood, or the years that man stole from you in that house. But I can give you the truth before the whole court, and I can give you your name, and I can spend what is left of my life making certain no one ever again decides you should not exist. Maeve looked at the man who had wanted her dead. She thought of all the ways she had imagined this moment, the rage she had nursed, the speeches she had rehearsed in the dark, and she found to her own astonishment that she did not want his death. She had seen enough cages built from fear and old sins. She would not build another. "Then let me live," she said, "not as a weapon, not as a claim, as a woman who decides her own days. That is all I have ever wanted." The court was reshaped around her. She was acknowledged, given a name and a title and a place, though she refused the throne itself, wanting no part of a crown that had nearly cost her life before she could walk. The lords who had hoped to use her, as the Earl had hoped to use her, found her watchful and clever and impossible to move. A woman who had learned in a single locked room how to read the hearts of dangerous men. The Earl of Harrowmere did not escape. He was tried before the full court for what he had done, and Maeve was made to stand and tell it. Every year of it, the bolt and the dust and the single window, and she did, in a voice that did not shake. He was stripped of his lands and his title, and sent to a fortress on the cold northern coast, to live out his days in a single stone room with one window, and Maeve felt no joy in it, only a quiet, level justice. He had wanted to know what it was to be kept. Now he would learn. She visited him once. She did not know why, only that she needed to look at him and feel nothing, to prove the attic had not made her into him. He sat by his window, grey and diminished, and when he saw her he gave that thin, cold smile one last time. "Have you come to gloat?" "No," she said. "I have come to tell you that I forgive you, not for your sake. For mine, I will not carry you any further than I already have." She left him there with his smile faltering, and she did not look back, and she found that the not looking back cost her nothing at all. And then there was Rydian Vale. She had asked herself, on every night of that long road, whether the steady captain would raise his sword to protect her, or to obey when the king gave the order. The order had never come, but she had her answer all the same, because in the tense days when no one knew which way the king would turn, Vale had stationed himself outside her door and told her, plainly, that if the order came to harm her, he would lay down his commission and his life before he carried it out. He had served the crown for 15 years. He gave it up in a single breath for her, before he even knew whether she would survive the week. "Why?" she had asked him. "Because I found you in that room," he said, "and I have spent my life serving men who decide which people are allowed to be real. I am finished with it. You are real to me. That is the whole of it." She did not trust easily. Her mother's warning still lived in her, and it always would. But trust, she had learned, was not a door you flung open. It was a thing built slowly, brick by careful brick. And Rydian Vale had spent every day since he found her laying bricks without asking for anything in return. She loved him for it, though she was slow to say the word, having spent 7 years learning that the things you love can be taken. When she finally did say it, on an ordinary afternoon, with the sun warm on both their faces, he wept, and she understood that steadiness in Aman was not always a danger. Sometimes it was the safest thing in the world. Maeve stood at a window of her own choosing now, in a house with doors that opened from the inside. The sun fell across her hands, and she did not flinch from it, and she did not hold it too tightly either. She had been a village girl, and a prisoner, and an heir, and she had survived all of it. Her mother had given everything to keep one small flame alive in the dark. Maeve meant to let it burn in the open now, for as long as it was given to her, and to be afraid of no one. She thought of the girl who had taken a stranger's hand because she was tired and alone. She would not undo it if she could. That girl had survived. That girl had walked out of the dark and into her own name, and whatever came next, she would meet it standing in the light with the door unlocked and her own 2 feet beneath her. 2 years passed, and Maeve learned that the strange thing about freedom was how quietly it arrived. There was no single morning when she woke and felt the attic finally leave her. It happened in small ways over months. The day she opened a door without first listening for footsteps on the other side. The night she slept with the candle dark and did not notice until morning. The afternoon she laughed, really laughed, at something Rydian said, and the sound startled her because she had not heard her own laughter in so long she had forgotten its shape. She married him in the spring, in a small chapel with the doors thrown wide and the sun pouring in, because she would never again stand in a room she could not leave. The old king did not live to see it. He had died that winter peacefully, his haunted face smoothed at last, and Maeve had sat with him in his final hours, holding the hand that had once signed an order for her death. She had forgiven him too by then. She had learned that carrying a grudge was its own kind of cage, and she was done living in cages of any sort. She did not take the throne. A cousin sat it now, a decent enough man, and Maeve kept to a quiet estate with land that ran down to the sea she had dreamed of from an attic window and never thought she would touch. She walked its shore every morning. The waves did not care who she had been, village girl or prisoner or lost heir. They only asked that she stand and breathe and be, and she found she was very good at that now. But the past was not entirely finished with her. It came, as it always did, in the form of an unexpected visitor, an old woman, travel-worn, asking at the gate for the lady of the house by a name no one used anymore, the name from the village. Maeve came down herself, and her breath caught because she knew the broad shoulders and the kind, lined face even after all these years. It was Bess, the midwife from Westlow, the woman who had called her little sparrow. They sat together in the warm kitchen, and Bess wept to see her alive, and then she set something on the table between them. A small wooden box, cracked with age, the box from beneath the hearthstone, the one Maeve had left behind in her grief at 12 years old. "I dug it out the day after that fine carriage took you," Bess said. "I never trusted that man. I kept it safe all these years, hoping you'd come back. When word reached even our little village that the lost princess had your name and your mother's face, I knew. I walked the whole way, child. I had to bring it home to you." Maeve opened it with shaking hands. Inside lay a faded ribbon, a lock of dark hair tied with thread, and a small portrait painted on ivory, no bigger than her palm. A young woman with Maeve's exact eyes, dressed in fine silk, smiling, her mother. Not the tired lady's maid she had become, but the woman she had been before, beautiful and unafraid, in the days before she gave up everything to carry a baby into the dark. And tucked beneath it, a single line scratched into the wood of the box itself in her mother's hand. "You were never stolen. You were saved. Live like it." Maeve pressed the box to her chest and wept, and Rydian held her, and Bess held them both. And for the first time in her life Maeve understood, all the way down, that she had been loved before she could even remember being alive. That every locked door and lonely year had been the cost of a mother's impossible love, and that the love had won. It had simply taken 20 years to finish arriving. She kept the box on the windowsill of the room where the morning sun came first, and when her own daughter was born the following year, she named the child Oriane, and she raised her with every door unlocked, every window open, and not a single secret she would ever have to die to keep. The girl who had taken a stranger's hand because she was tired and afraid had become a woman who feared nothing. The attic was just a room now, in a house that belonged to someone else, in a story she had finally finished telling. And the light she had reached for through dusty glass for 7 endless years, fell warm across her face every single morning. And she let it, and she was free. Tell me, did Maeve's story move you the way it moved me to tell it? Do you think she was right to forgive the men who wronged her? Or would you have wanted them to pay a harder price? And what would you have kept hidden in that little wooden box? Thank you so much for staying with me all the way to the end of Maeve's journey. It truly means the world that you spent this time here. If her story touched your heart, please do me one small kindness and tap that subscribe button so you never miss a tale like this one. More stories of love, courage, and secrets worth surviving are coming very soon, and I would love for you to be here when they do. Until next time, keep your doors unlocked and your heart in the light.